What was happening in the 1960s in the USA? A decade of change, a time of upheaval, a period that reshaped the fabric of American society. But beyond the iconic images and catchy tunes, what was the real story of the 1960s? Sure, someone wrote a song about it and some guy invented something revolutionary, but beneath the surface, beneath the headlines and the history books, what were the people of America experiencing? What were their hopes, their fears, their dreams? Join us on a journey back in time as we uncover the untold stories of the 1960s in America. From the struggle for civil rights to the fight against injustice, from the triumphs of innovation to the tragedies of war, this was a decade that defined a generation and changed the course of history. Welcome to the 1960s, Beyond the Headlines. Let's dive in and discover the real story together.
It's the dawn of 1960. The air is filled with hope, trepidation, and the unmistakable sound of rock and roll. The United States is on the precipice of a decade that will forever be etched in the annals of history, the Turbulent Sixties. A time of unprecedented change, the 60s were a crucible in which the United States was both forged and tested. This was a decade that bore witness to the triumphs of the civil rights movement, a struggle for equality that reverberates to this day. Men and women, like Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks, would stand against the tide of discrimination and segregation, their actions culminating in landmark legislation such as the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Simultaneously, the world held its breath as the Cuban Missile Crisis brought us to the brink of nuclear Armageddon. The firm stance of President John F. Kennedy and his diplomatic efforts averted disaster, but the crisis was a stark reminder of the high stakes of the Cold War. And who could forget the tragic assassination of President Kennedy in 1963, a moment that shocked the nation and the world, forever altering the course of American history. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the United States found itself embroiled in the Vietnam War, a conflict that sparked widespread protests and opposition, tearing at the fabric of American society. Yet amidst the upheaval, there were moments of unity and hope. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963, with King's iconic I Have a Dream speech, and the Woodstock Music Festival in 1969, both represented the ideals of peace, love, and unity. Each of these events, in its own way, shaped the landscape of the United States during this tumultuous era. So buckle up as we dive headfirst into the roiling waters of the 60s. Just 2 years into the decade, the world found itself teetering on the edge of nuclear war. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a 13-day-long face-off between two of the world's most powerful nations, the United States and the Soviet Union. The crisis was a high-stakes game of chess, a dangerous dance of power and strategy that brought humanity to the brink of nuclear obliteration. In the early 1960s, the Cold War was more frigid than ever. The ideological divide between the democratic West and the communist East was profound and seemingly insurmountable. The United States, under the leadership of President John F. Kennedy, was intent on containing the spread of communism, particularly in its own backyard, the Americas. In 1962, the Soviets, led by Nikita Khrushchev, began to place nuclear missiles in Cuba, a mere 90 miles off the coast of Florida. The strategic advantage was clear. The missiles could reach almost every corner of the United States within minutes, drastically tipping the scales of power in favor of the Soviets. When American intelligence discovered the missile installations, the crisis was ignited. President Kennedy was faced with an unimaginably difficult decision. He could either launch a full-scale attack and risk triggering a nuclear war, or opt for a diplomatic solution that could potentially weaken the United States' stance against communism. Kennedy chose a middle ground. He ordered a naval blockade around Cuba, preventing any further Soviet shipments from reaching the island. It was a show of force, yes, but it also left room for negotiation. The message was clear. The United States would not tolerate a nuclear threat so close to home, but it was also willing to avoid war at all costs. The world held its breath as the two superpowers locked horns. For 13 nerve-wracking days, the threat of nuclear war loomed large, but diplomacy eventually prevailed. Behind the scenes, frantic negotiations led to a deal. The Soviets would dismantle their missile installations in Cuba, and the United States would secretly remove its own missiles from Turkey. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a sobering reminder of the fragility of peace in the nuclear age. It was a testament to the power of diplomacy and the value of restraint in the face of immense pressure. The crisis was a pivotal moment in the Cold War, a stark warning of the potential devastation that could occur when power is wielded irresponsibly. The Cuban Missile Crisis was a turning point. It marked a shift in Cold War dynamics, prompting both superpowers to seek out more peaceful means of conflict resolution. The crisis underscored the need for open lines of communication, leading to the establishment of the Moscow-Washington Hotline, a direct communication link between the United States and the Soviet Union. In 1963, the world stood still as the news broke. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. A day that will forever be etched in the annals of American history, November 22nd, 1963, when the 35th President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, was fatally shot. As the youngest elected to the office and the second youngest to serve, JFK's presidency was marked by youth, vigor, and a promise of a brighter future. His charismatic personality, coupled with his compelling vision for a new frontier, resonated with the American public. His untimely death, therefore, wasn't merely the loss of a president. It was as if the nation's heartbeat had momentarily stopped. Kennedy was on a political trip in Dallas, Texas, cruising through Dealey Plaza in an open-top limousine, waving at the enthusiastic crowd gathered to catch a glimpse of their charismatic leader. Suddenly, shots rang out, and the president slumped over, struck by bullets. Rushed to Parkland Hospital, it was here at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time that President Kennedy was declared dead. The nation plunged into a state of shock, grief, and disbelief. The man arrested for his assassination was Lee Harvey Oswald, a former U.S. Marine. Oswald was apprehended, but his life, too, was abruptly ended 2 days later, shot dead on live television by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. These swift and brutal events added to the trauma and confusion of those horrific days in November. The aftermath of JFK's assassination was a whirlwind of emotions, investigations, and more questions than answers. The official Warren Commission report concluded that Oswald acted alone, firing 3 shots from the Texas School Book Depository. However, numerous conspiracy theories have emerged over the years, questioning the commission's findings. Some argue there was a second shooter on the grassy knoll. Others suggest a broader conspiracy possibly involving the mafia, the CIA, or even a coup within the U.S. government. These theories, while varying in credibility, underline the profound impact of Kennedy's death and the lingering doubts about the events of that day. The JFK assassination didn't just end a presidency, it marked a significant turning point in American history. It transformed the nation's psyche, instilling a sense of cynicism and mistrust in government that has echoed through subsequent generations. It was an event that signaled the end of a period of relative innocence and the beginning of a more complex, skeptical era. Kennedy's death also left a lasting legacy of what-ifs. What if JFK had served out his term? What might he have accomplished? His death has forever left these questions unanswered, fueling a sense of loss and longing for what might have been. The tragic loss of JFK cast a long shadow over the nation, marking an end of innocence for many. His assassination remains one of the most shocking and heart-wrenching events of the turbulent 60s, a stark reminder of the decade's darker side amid its many transformative changes. As the 60s progressed, so did the Vietnam War, a conflict that would deeply divide the American people. The Vietnam War, which began in the 50s, escalated dramatically during the 60s. The United States, fearing the spread of communism, decided to intervene on behalf of South Vietnam, who was battling against communist North Vietnam. This marked a significant shift in America's Cold War strategy, from containment to active involvement. In the early 60s, the number of American military advisors in Vietnam was in the thousands. But by the middle of the decade, the United States had committed hundreds of thousands of combat troops. The conflict escalated under President Lyndon B. Johnson, who, following the Gulf of Tonkin incident in 1964, obtained congressional approval to take all necessary measures to repel armed attack and prevent further aggression. The reasons behind the escalation were multifaceted. The domino theory, popular during the Cold War, suggested that if one country in a region came under the influence of communism, then the surrounding countries would follow in a domino effect. There was also the belief that the US had a moral obligation to defend freedom and prevent the spread of totalitarian communism. However, the war was far from straightforward. It was a war fought not just on battlefields, but in villages and rice paddies. It was a war without front lines, where friends could turn into foes in an instant, and where distinguishing between civilians and combatants was often impossible. As the war dragged on, it sparked widespread protests back home. The American public, initially supportive of the intervention, grew increasingly disillusioned. They saw a conflict without clear objectives, a war that was costing thousands of American lives and billions of dollars, yet seemed no closer to an end. The images of war brought into living rooms by television fueled outrage and opposition. The protests took many forms. Students staged sit-ins and teach-ins, burned draft cards, and marched on Washington. They were joined by civil rights activists, religious leaders, and veterans. The anti-war movement became a defining feature of the 60s counterculture, a powerful expression of dissent and resistance. The Vietnam War also sparked a fierce political debate. Hawks, who supported the war, argued that abandoning South Vietnam would harm American credibility and encourage further aggression. Doves, who opposed the war, argued that it was an unwinnable quagmire, a tragic waste of lives and resources. The war left an indelible mark on the American psyche. It eroded trust in government, stoked social unrest, and led to a reassessment of America's role in the world. It also led to changes in military policy, including the end of the draft and a shift towards an all-volunteer force. The Vietnam War became a defining issue of the 60s, one that still echoes in American society today. In August of 1963, hundreds of thousands gathered in the nation's capital for the March on Washington. The sweltering summer heat did little to deter the sea of people, a diverse tapestry of races, ages, and backgrounds, from congregating at the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. They came with a shared purpose, a collective demand for jobs and freedom, a call to end the racial segregation and discrimination that had marred the American landscape for far too long. The March on Washington was more than just a mass gathering. It was a pivotal moment in the civil rights movement, a monumental demonstration of the power of peaceful protest. It brought together civil rights organizations, religious groups, labor unions, and individual activists, all united under the banner of justice and equality. At the heart of this historic event was Martin Luther King Jr., a Baptist minister and civil rights leader whose eloquent speeches and nonviolent resistance had made him a central figure in the fight against racial inequality. As he took the podium, a hush fell over the crowd. What followed was a speech that would echo through the annals of history, a passionate plea for freedom that continues to inspire generations. King's "I Have a Dream" speech was a masterstroke of oratory, a powerful expression of his vision for a future where his children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. It was a dream of a nation where freedom and justice would be realities for all, not just empty promises on a parchment. Despite the magnitude of the gathering, the March on Washington was not met with universal approval. There were those who viewed it as a threat to the status quo, a disruption of the social order. But the marchers were undeterred. They knew that the road to equality was a long and arduous one, paved with resistance and setbacks. But they also knew that every step taken, every voice raised, brought them closer to their goal. The March on Washington had a profound impact on the nation and the world. It brought the civil rights struggle into the living rooms of millions, forcing the country to confront its own reflection. It sparked a wave of legislation, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, that sought to dismantle the institutionalized racism ingrained in American society. The march was more than a single day's event. It was a catalyst, a turning point in the long journey towards racial equality. It served as a testament to the power of unity, the strength of conviction, and the enduring spirit of those who dare to dream of a better world. The March on Washington was a powerful statement of unity and determination, a cry for justice that still resonates today. It reminds us of the power of collective action, of the ability of ordinary people to shape extraordinary change. And while the march may have ended, the journey continues. As we look back on that historic day, let us also look forward, carrying the torch of progress towards a future where King's dream is not just a vision, but a reality. In 1969, a small dairy farm in New York would become the epicenter of the counterculture movement. Welcome to Woodstock. In the late 60s, a generation yearned for peace and unity amidst a backdrop of war and social upheaval. And in that yearning, the Woodstock Music Festival was born. A 3-day extravaganza of music and camaraderie, Woodstock was more than a concert. It was an embodiment of the ideals and spirit of the counterculture movement. The festival was the brainchild of 4 young entrepreneurs who sought to create a once-in-a-lifetime music experience. It was initially planned as a profit-making venture, but as the crowd swelled beyond their wildest expectations, the fences were torn down, and Woodstock morphed into a free event, a gift to the people. And what a gift it was. The lineup read like a who's who of the era's biggest rock and folk stars. Imagine gazing up at the stage as Richie Havens kicked off the festival with his impassioned performance. Picture yourself swaying to the soulful voice of Janis Joplin under the moonlight, or being mesmerized by the psychedelic rock of Jimi Hendrix as he played a searing, feedback-drenched rendition of the Star-Spangled Banner. But it wasn't just about the music. Woodstock was a monumental social and cultural event. It was a gathering of nearly 500,000 people, a microcosm of the counterculture movement, a collective yearning for peace, love, and understanding. The attendees, affectionately known as Woodstock Nation, represented a generation in search of an alternative way of life, one that rejected war and embraced love and unity. Despite the rain, the mud, the lack of food, and proper sanitation, the spirit of Woodstock remained undeterred. There were no outbreaks of violence, no major incidents. Instead, there was sharing, caring, and a sense of community that radiated throughout the festival. It was a testament to the ethos of the counterculture movement: peace, love, and music. Of course, Woodstock was not without its critics. Many saw it as a symbol of societal decay, a chaotic gathering of young people shirking responsibilities. Yet it's hard to ignore the profound impact it had on the collective consciousness of a generation and beyond. It served as a beacon of hope, a demonstration of what could be achieved when people came together in the spirit of unity and peace. The iconic performances, the sea of people stretching as far as the eye could see, the emblematic peace sign, it all contributed to the magic and myth of Woodstock. It was a spectacle like no other, a snapshot of an era, and a testament to the transformative power of music and unity. Woodstock was more than just a music festival. It was a defining moment of the counterculture movement and the spirit of the 60s. In the wake of the Civil Rights Act, another milestone was reached: the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This landmark legislation was a mighty leap forward in the civil rights movement, aiming to overcome the legal barriers that had been erected to prevent African Americans from exercising their right to vote. This act was a direct response to the widespread discriminatory voting practices that were prevalent, especially in the South. Tactics such as literacy tests, poll taxes, and outright intimidation were used to suppress the African American vote and maintain the status quo of racial segregation and inequality. But the winds of change were blowing. President Lyndon B. Johnson, who had already shown his commitment to civil rights by pushing for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, stepped up once again. On August 6, 1965, he signed the Voting Rights Act into law, outlawing these discriminatory practices and providing federal oversight of elections in states with a history of voter suppression. The impact of the Voting Rights Act was immediate and profound. In states like Mississippi, where less than 7% of African Americans were registered to vote in 1964, the figure jumped to over 60% by 1968. Across the South, African American voter registration saw a similar surge, signaling a seismic shift in the political landscape. The Voting Rights Act didn't just increase the number of African American voters. It also led to the election of more African American leaders at local, state, and national levels. Representation matters, and for the first time in American history, African Americans were gaining a voice in the halls of power, a voice that could speak to their unique experiences and advocate for their rights. And yet, the Voting Rights Act was not a magic wand that instantly eliminated all racial discrimination. Many challenges remained, and new forms of voter suppression emerged over time. The fight for voting rights continues even today, reminding us that the march towards equality is a journey, not a destination. But despite these challenges, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 stands as a testament to the power of collective action and the enduring spirit of the civil rights movement. It serves as a beacon of hope, a symbol of progress, and a reminder of the long, hard-fought battle for equality and justice. As we reflect on the turbulent 60s, it's important to remember the Voting Rights Act not just as a piece of legislation, but as a monumental victory for civil rights. It was a victory won through the courage and determination of countless individuals who dared to dream of a better, more equal America. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was another significant step forward in the march towards equality. As the decade came to a close, the impact of the turbulent 60s was clear. This was a decade that had dared to dream, dared to challenge, and dared to change. The 60s were a whirlwind of social, political, and cultural revolution that, for better or worse, shaped the course of American history. The civil rights movement, a driving force behind this decade, fought tirelessly for equality and justice. From the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the victories were hard-won, but they marked a turning point in the fight against racial prejudice and discrimination. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, while the tragic assassination of President John F. Kennedy left a scar on the national psyche that is felt to this day. Yet, in the face of such adversity, America showed resilience and resolve. The escalation of the Vietnam War was a contentious issue that divided the nation and sparked widespread protests. It was a painful reminder of the cost of war, but it also became a catalyst for a wave of anti-war sentiment and activism. As we look back, it's clear that the legacy of the 60s is alive and well. The movements that began during this time continue to inspire and influence our society. The struggle for civil rights has paved the way for subsequent battles for equality. The spirit of protest and activism has become a cornerstone of our democracy. The 60s were a decade like no other. It was a time of turmoil, but also a time of great hope and transformative change. A time that has left an indelible mark on the fabric of America. The turbulent 60s were a decade of change, conflict, and ultimately, progress. A time that has left an indelible mark on the fabric of America. Yet, amidst this era of change and conflict, there was one event that transcended the divides and unified the world in awe and wonder. This was a moment that marked a triumph not just for America, but for all of mankind. In 1969, the United States achieved the unimaginable, landing the first humans on the moon. It was an endeavor that embodied the spirit of the 60s, a time when boundaries were pushed, norms were challenged, and the impossible was made possible. The Apollo 11 mission, led by astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, was a testament to human innovation, courage, and determination. As Armstrong took his historic first step on the lunar surface, uttering the immortal words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," the world watched in awe. This monumental event served as a beacon of hope and progress during a time of turmoil. It was a symbol of what humanity could achieve when united by a common goal. It was a testament to the power of science, the audacity of imagination, and the indomitable spirit of exploration. The moon landing was not just a scientific feat, it was a cultural milestone that captured the imagination of millions and inspired generations to dream bigger and reach further. As we continue this journey through the 60s, let's remember this extraordinary achievement and the spirit of exploration it represented. For it is in exploring the unknown that we truly understand ourselves and our place in the cosmos.